Hi everyone, here we are in the last module of the class. We're going to talk about organizational culture in this chapter, and we're going to talk about managing change and managing your career. So it's an interesting section. It's kind of a nice little capstone, and a lot of good information that I think you can use now and in the future as well. So when we talk about culture, a culture essentially is you could think of it as a company's personality, company's personality. Just like people have personalities, companies have personalities. People have values, companies have values. People behave in certain ways, companies behave in certain ways. And what a culture is like will tell you a lot about the company and whether or not you're going to fit in there. That's the big thing that I'm hoping people will take from this, or do take from this, is making sure you pick a place. Sorry, I'm going to make that where the culture matches your beliefs in your beliefs and value system. And culture is a shared set of beliefs and values. Okay, so organizational culture, a pattern of basic assumptions that are considered valid and that are taught to new members as the way to perceive, think, and feel in the organization. So again, a shared set of beliefs and values. So when we, you can what those values are, depends, and what's important to some places are not important to others, and in certain industries, things that are important in certain industries are not important in others, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about that as we go through. Okay, so there's 3 different levels of culture. Artifacts, those are the things that you can see. The work environment, so things like how desks are laid out, or who has certain offices, or when you walk into a place, what kind of what's on the walls. If there's they won the softball league, then clearly the social aspect of the company is very important. Or certain awards they've received from other places, from industry organizations, that kind of thing. So artifacts are things you can see, and things that people do. Espoused values are basic. There's values, okay, and those are the espoused values, which is what they say is important, and the enacted values, which is how people actually behave. So if they say, for example, that putting a lot of time in is important, and that they expect you to work a 60, 70 hour week, but yet people who only work the 40-hour week are the ones that are rewarded, then the espoused values don't match the enacted values. Okay, and then assumptions are essentially really deeply held beliefs. They're things that people take for granted. You can't see them, but they're things that are so deeply ingrained that people don't talk about them, but are things that come to people, through time. Okay, so let's take a look at each level a little bit more in depth. Artifacts. So the visible but not decipherable means that you can see them, but you might not always understand what they mean. So personal enactment, what it is that people do. Ceremonies and rites. So ceremonies and rites would be things like an Employee of the Month award, or every year they have a holiday party, or every year they work on some sort of social service project, like the Habitat for Humanity or something like that. Those would be things. Then stories. So let's go back to personal enactment a little bit. So basically, what it is that people believe in and how people behave, particularly people at the top with personal enactment, and whether they believe customer service is important, or whether they believe that training is very important, that kind of thing. Okay, ceremonies and rites, as I said, are things that you see, activities that people participate in. Award ceremonies, social service projects that the company does as a whole, the employees do as a whole, fundraising, that kind of thing. So what are the is it that they do the Christmas party every year, the holiday party every year? Do they, instead of doing the holiday party, they everyone, instead of the company paying for it, maybe everybody chips in, that kind of thing. So what is it that people are interested in? An annual awards dinner, that kind of thing. Okay, stories. Every company has stories, and you hear about, some of them after time become legend, and some of them are true. Most of them are true. How the company started, how the founder, started the company in the garage and worked really hard and developed really good relationships with the neighborhood and worked with partners in the community, and that's why they believe in community still. So stories about how people get promoted, stories about how things were handled in a crisis, whether people took responsibility, whether it was shuffled under the rug, that kind of thing. Um, how people feel about what the hierarchy is, and whether or not people can talk to each other in terms of it's okay for the CEO might come and eat lunch with people. So um, there are stories that go around, and as I said, sometimes they're true, and sometimes sometimes they might be a little bit embellished, but yet they still tell something about the collective personality of the organization. Okay, next are rituals. So rituals are things like Wegmans, for example. They have a pre shift meeting for the managers. So it's a ritual. They get together, they share information. Um, uh, you know, every year, maybe at the annual picnic, um, there's a face off between, say, two different departments in some sort of tug of war or something like that. So those are rituals. Symbols are things that communicate the culture through unspoken messages. So, for example, uh, maybe people always wear, a certain uniform to show their loyalty, or maybe, um, people who work at Coca-Cola only drive red cars, that kind of thing. I'm not saying they do, but things that people will show their dedication to the organization. That's the idea of symbols. Okay, so culture, there's a really important function to culture. It provides a sense of identity to members, and it also helps them to create commitment because they understand what the company is about, then they can commit more to it. It works as a way to make sense of certain things. So maybe, you don't really fully understand why people are getting promoted the way they are, or through the past they're being promoted to, but maybe because of the culture, you understand that it's only people who've been there X number of years that get promoted because that's just part of the culture. Helps make sense of things you might not fully understand. It reinforces the values of the organization, and to a certain extent, it can also serve as a control mechanism, um, so that people will behave in certain ways. Okay, so there's a lot of talk about the fit between what's the culture like, and then performance. So there are essentially three different ways that we look at that: strong culture, fit perspective, and adaptive. So we'll go through one by one. So strong culture is this idea that the culture of the organization is so strong that people from the outside world, outside the organization, even know what that culture is. So we hear a lot about the tech firms, Google, Facebook, that kind of thing. That this idea that people are there, they have campuses, they call them campuses, and which sort of reinforces the fact that there's a lot of young people there, and they're coming right from schools. That there's a on-site gymnasium and on-site cafeteria that provides free food for people all day long, and there's places you can go and hang out and relax and play ping pong and that kind of thing. That it's the people from the outside even know what it is. That everyone understands that it's what that is, what that culture is going to be. So it's usually this idea of we'll talk about the Google and Facebook tech company example, that they thrive in creativity, and they also want dedication. So that sort of aligns with what they're looking for. And there's also this idea that everyone believes in it, so everyone's feeling the same way. Everyone's really gung ho on it. Everyone does spend a lot of time at work, and it's something that's shared with everyone. Okay, next is this idea of fit perspective. So that a culture is only as good if it fits into the industry that the organization is a part of. So, for example, a bank, you want a bank to have a pretty conservative culture. and that there's not necessarily a lot of room for creativity. But at an advertising agency, you're going to want to have a lot of creativity, right? That if it's like if an advertising agency is too rigid, then it's not going to be a good advertising agency, because it's about creativity and freedom of thought and all that kind of thing. So you want to think about when you're talking about culture, as I said, every industry will have a different culture. And even within industries, let's think about the restaurant industry. A corner bar might have a different culture than, say, a fine dining, restaurant, that kind of thing. So, but it depends upon what's going on with your competitors, what your customers expect. A customer is going to walk into a bank. They want to see someone who's pretty conservative. They don't want to see a lot of wild, crazy stuff, because they're taking care of their money. And then what society at large expects from a certain industry. So think about healthcare and insurance, banking, a tech company. We have different ideas of what we would expect from those. Okay, then adaptive cultures. If you take in the management class, we talk a lot about learning cultures, and this idea that industries constantly, no industry now can escape this idea of learning and being flexible to changes in your industry and changes in your outside external environment. And so adaptive cultures are cultures that are just that. They take risks. They have confidence in risk taking. People are change focused, have a lot of focus on change, and focused on what's going on externally, what's going on internally with the culture, with the customers, and with the environment. Okay, so you can just take a look at this. It's just a look at what adaptive cultures versus non-adaptive cultures. It's just something that might help you better understand where you work, or better understand when you're looking for a new job, which I'm sure many of you will be at some point, particularly those of you who might be graduating soon. What you might want to look at if you're interested in an adaptive versus a non-adaptive culture. Okay, so there are some things that you want to think about when you're managing, in terms of managing culture. One is, what is it that leaders pay attention to? Do they pay attention to the people who are continuing their education? Do they pay attention to? Are they all really hung up on attendance levels and that kind of thing? How people react to crises. So we see that there's lots of examples about how people respond to crisis. Two that we can talk about that historically. One was, there's been problems at GM. There's a problem with GM with the car ignitions, that the keys were too heavy, and they were having the engines were starting on fire and people were dying. And it came out that there's actually a lot of literature about that said that it really was a culture problem, and that the people at GM did not want to hear about anything bad. They just wanted it was frowned upon to go to your boss with a problem such as that. So that would be they not paying attention to that. And they pretty much came out and said that they did a cost benefit analysis, that it was cheaper to pay off the families of the people who had died than it was to change the technology in the car. So that's important. Okay, how leaders behave. Do they behave ethically? Are they like wild partiers? Are they, are they, really mild mannered? And what kind of example do they give? How leaders allocate rewards. So who gets the jobs? Who gets the promotions, and who gets the raises and that kind of thing? And then how they go through hiring and firing people. Is it is it lots of people's brothers-in-law and sisters-in-law and children that are there? Do they, just hire people? They go through a very intensive process to hire people? Do they really screen people? So how is it that people are hired and fired? What's that? How difficult is it to get in? Or is there favoritism showed? Okay, so there's this idea of socialization. So it's the way people are brought into the organization, and when they first arrive. When socialization is this idea that people being, I don't want to say broken in, but that's kind of a good word for it. People getting acclimated and accustomed to what's going on. So let's take a look. There's essentially 3 different levels. There's the anticipatory socialization, the encounter with the organization. There's a change, what people go through, and then eventually the full socialization. So we go anticipatory socialization. It's the first stage. It's what people expect. It's what people anticipate before they get into before they become a member of the organization. I'm going to work at a bank, and so I'm expecting it to be on a very rigid lunch schedule, and there's going to be regulatory influences, that kind of thing. So what is it that before people even get to work, before people start the job, what is it that they expect? They expect things are going to be casual. They expect things are going to be tight. What do they think? Encounter is when they actually learn what's going on, and it's clarify is spelled incorrectly. I apologize. I will fix that. They clarify the roles, and then they establish what's going to happen. So that's sort of like when we're talking about team building, the storming phase. And then change and acquisition is when people actually become to master the demands of the job and understand the expectations. Okay, so generally speaking, socialization is a very positive thing. It leads to good performance. It leads to happy workers, and happy workers lead to good performance and greater job satisfaction. People tend to stay with the organization longer. There's less stress, and there's higher commitment. So it's the idea that people feel comfortable. It's establishing a level of comfort. Okay, so we talked about doing it like an inventory, so to speak, of an organization. So trying to figure out what it is that people are paying attention to, and that what is it that what is it that's expected? What are the behaviors that are expected? So you can also go look at we look at a variety of things we talked about already. The Maslow's need hierarchy, in terms of whether or not the company looks at people's social needs, that kind of thing. What's happening and what people's expectations are. So, and essentially people look at two different things. The technical aspect of it, are people given the tools to do their job? And are there also this whole idea of the technical human side, and then also providing time. And then, so the other way to do to measure the culture, do the inventory culture, is this idea of triangulation, which is looking at it from a variety of different perspectives, different levels of the organization, and also internally and externally. Okay, so culture changes, internal, external. We take a quick look at that. So there are all sorts of reasons that cultures are changing quickly these days, globalization not being the least of them. We're increasing diversity in the workplace, technological innovations. All these things are things that are forcing cultures to really, forcing organizations to really face their cultures, and some of the basic assumptions really might be challenged and need to be changed and addressed. So cultural change is really difficult because sometimes people don't realize that they're making these assumptions, that they're just underlying, and it's so hard. It's really not part of our consciousness. When we're in an organization, sometimes it takes an outsider to point things out and say, well, why are you doing that? Like trying to really understand what's going on. And, it's things that are very deeply ingrained in us, people that, things that we just don't think about. Why do we do the Christmas party every year in January instead of in December? Why do we, always hold the, why is it that we always start the new employees, the first week of the quarter? Why isn't that they only, why don't we let them come in a rolling point, that kind of, at a rolling rate, instead of, having, why is it, why are there only 2 training programs a year? That kind of thing. All right, and then there's a lot of challenges to developing positive cultures. Merger acquisition, the best way really, is when 2 companies join together, or one company buys another company. The best thing you can really relate that to in real life is when there's a blended family. They're trying to mesh the culture and rituals of 2 different families together. Or the same thing, trying to mesh those 2 companies together. So developing the global culture, because internationally all have different different cultures expect different things. People have different work weeks. People have different, access to family, expectations for spending time with family. Also changing quite a bit recently is this whole idea of ethics in organizations. That's changed. There's more ethical expectations and also legislation. And then also this whole idea of empowerment, making sure that people feel empowered in the workplace and feel that they can, really become the best that they can be. So anyway, culture, that's really a very quick look at culture. Culture is very important. It's something actually that I'm particularly interested in. And I think it's really important before you work in an organization that you know what the culture is and make sure that fits with your culture, with your personality. And you can find that out by asking questions or asking questions of people interview you, asking questions of people who already work there. Sometimes also a really good source of information is just doing a quick Google search on that organization and see what articles you can find that might share information about the culture. Employee handbook that might also share some information. It might shed some light on some things. So anyway, that's culture, and I hope you find it interesting. Thanks.